The smoke curled lazily from the thatched kitchen hut, rising into the afternoon sky like a silent plea. Inside, Amara bent low over the three-legged fire, her belly heavy and round with the life growing inside her. Beads of sweat rolled down her smooth, dark skin, tracing paths along her weary face. Her breath came slow and shallow, but her hands never stopped moving, stirring the bubbling soup, fanning the firewood, grinding the pepper with shaky fingers. The weight of 8 moons pressed against her ribs, but no one came to help. Outside, laughter exploded like thunderclaps in the compound. Chidi, her husband, sat with his friends under the wide udala tree, their voices loud and careless. Calabashes of palm wine clinked together as they drank deep, their bellies full and their hearts light. Chidi's deep voice boomed above the rest, mocking, commanding, bragging. "Amara!" He barked without turning. "The soup had better be ready soon. My brothers are hungry. Do you want to starve real men?" The men roared with laughter, their eyes glinting with mischief. They did not see the flicker of pain that crossed Amara's face, nor the way she gritted her teeth to stop herself from crying out. Slowly she rose from her crouch, wincing as sharp pain shot through her swollen feet. Still she lifted the heavy clay pot, her thin arms trembling under its weight. Every evening had become a theater of humiliation. Chidi, once a gentle man she thought she had loved, had turned hard and cruel as a yam that refused to cook. Ever since her womb had swelled, he had lost all patience for her slowness, all kindness for her pain. Now he paraded her suffering before his friends as a show of his strength, as if forcing a pregnant woman to serve them made him more of a man. "Move faster, woman!" Chidi shouted again, slapping his palm against his thigh. "Is that baby slowing your legs or your brain?" Another wave of cruel laughter broke from the circle of men. Amara bowed her head and shuffled towards the doorway, the aroma of the soup rich with uziza leaves trailing behind her. Her mind, however, was far away, back to a time when Chidi's voice had been soft, when his hands had cradled her belly with wonder, not contempt, back to the promises he had made on their wedding day under the gaze of the ancestors. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed her tears. The baby within her shifted gently, as if reminding her that life still breathed in her body, even when her spirit felt empty. From across the compound, old Mama Nene sat quietly by her doorstep, her eyes sharp and watchful like an old eagle. Her thin lips pressed together in disapproval, but she said nothing, not yet. And as the evening sun cast long golden shadows over the village of Umudiki, a soft voice seemed to whisper through the air. What Chididi and his friends did not know was that by forcing her, they were setting in motion a chain of events that would bring them all to their knees. Before the weight of her womb and the weight of her sorrow became one, Amara's life had been like the first rainfall after Harmattan, fresh, sweet, and full of promises. She had been the pride of her father's compound, the daughter whose laughter tinkled like anklet bells and whose hands spun the smoothest cloth on the loom. Suitors from distant villages had lined the dusty paths to her family's gate, bringing baskets of kola nuts, goat meat, and fine wrappers. Yet it was Chidi, tall, broad-shouldered Chidi with a voice like warm honey, who had captured her heart. He had come not with boast, but with quiet strength. His mother had been a respected trader, his father a hunter, whose name was sung in village tales. Chidi had spoken gently to Amara, his gaze steady and true. When he asked for her hand, her heart had danced with hope. The elders nodded their approval. The bride price had been paid in full. The village drummers had beaten their best rhythms as Amara was led to his hut, her waist beads jingling beneath her wrapper. In those first moons, Chidi had been everything she had dreamed of. Patient, kind, attentive. He had fetched water with her at dawn, woven mats by her side in the evenings, and whispered stories of how many sons and daughters they would have. When the first signs of life stirred in her belly, his joy had spilled like overflowing palm wine. He had lifted her off her feet, spun her in circles, and announced to anyone who cared to listen that the strongest child in Umudike was growing inside his wife. But as the moons rolled forward and her belly stretched, something darker had settled in Chidi's spirit. It began subtly at first. A furrowed brow when she moved too slowly. A sharp sigh when she forgot to salt the soup just right. Soon the sighs turned to scolding, and the scolding sharpened into mockery. Friends began to visit more often, sitting long into the evenings drinking palm wine, and Chidi, eager to show off, would call Amara endlessly, sending her on errands, demanding food, laughing when she stumbled. "She is growing lazy," he would say with a crooked smile, slapping her backside hard enough to sting. His friends would laugh, slapping their knees. "What use is a woman who cannot work even with a baby inside her?" one of them had sneered. Amara bore it in silence. In Umudike, A woman did not run back to her father's house over small quarrels. Her mother's voice echoed in her ears. Marriage is like the raffia mat. You smooth the rough edges with patience. So Amara endured. Day after day, night after night, she cooked, cleaned, and served, her body growing heavier and her spirit thinner. But what many did not know, what Chidi had kept hidden even from his closest friends, was that his bitterness had a deeper root. Months earlier, word had reached him through the village grapevine that a rich palm oil merchant from Umuahia had admired Amara and spoken openly of how Chidi was too small a man to have such a fine wife. The merchant had even sent secret gifts, wrapped in silk and tied with cowries, though Amara had returned them untouched. But Chidi's pride had been wounded beyond healing. His mind, twisted by jealousy and fear, had convinced him that Amara would one day leave him, that her beauty and grace would slip from his grasp like water cupped in trembling palms. Instead of speaking his fears, Chidi had wrapped them in anger. If he could break her spirit, perhaps she would forget her worth. If he could parade her exhaustion before others, maybe they would no longer see her as a prize. And so the cruelty deepened. There were whispers. The market women clicked their tongues when Amara passed, their eyes dropping to her swollen feet and thin shoulders. Old Mama Nena had approached Chidi one market day and said softly, "A man's strength is shown in how he shields his wife, not how he shames her." But Chidi had only scoffed. "She is my wife. I know how to handle her." One evening, after a long day of serving his friends, Amara had collapsed by the fire. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Chidi's friends had glanced at each other uneasily. One or two had cleared their throats and mumbled that perhaps she needed rest. Chidi waved them off. "She is fine," he muttered. "She is pretending to gain sympathy. Women's tricks." And when Amara's childhood friend Chica had visited and pleaded quietly, "Let me help her, Brother Chidi." "She is tired." Chidi had flared like dry bush meeting a spark. "She is my wife. She will do as I say. If you like her suffering so much, take her to your father's compound." Ashamed, Chica had left in tears. Now, in the twilight of that heavy day, as Amara shuffled towards Chidi's friends with the hot pot of soup in her shaking arms, her heart weighed heavier than her belly. The cracks in her marriage had become deep scars, wounds cut not with knives but with words and actions too sharp to see but too deep to forget. Yet deep inside her chest, buried beneath the weariness and pain, a flicker of something remained. Not just survival, not just endurance, but something older and fiercer, something that could not be crushed by ridicule nor broken by humiliation, something that was waiting for its moment. And that moment, though none of them knew it yet, was drawing closer with every heartbeat. The clay pot slipped slightly in Amara's trembling grip as she approached the men gathered under the wide udala tree. The rich aroma of uziza and crayfish floated in, the warm evening air, but none of the men noticed. Their laughter had softened, their gazes drifting uneasily toward her thin frame, her swollen feet, her sweat-drenched wrapper clinging to her frail body. Even the boldest among them, Okoro, the blacksmith with arms thick as iroko branches, cleared his throat and shifted on his stool. As Amara lowered the pot before them, her hands quivered so violently that some of the steaming broth splashed onto her wrist, scalding her dark skin. She winced but did not cry out. Her eyes remained lowered, fixed on the dusty ground. "Ah, finally!" Chidi barked, louder than necessary, forcing his voice into its usual commanding boom. "What took you so long, woman? Were you brewing it in the river?" He reached for the ladle but paused. His friends weren't laughing. Their eyes darted from Amara's weary face to her shivering fingers, to the thin lines of pain etched into the corners of her lips. The jovial atmosphere had withered like a banana leaf left in Harmattan. Okoro broke the silence first. His deep voice rumbled, quiet but firm. "Chidi, this woman needs rest. Look at her. Even a goat heavy with young is spared the whip." There was a murmur of agreement. Emeka, the lanky palm wine tapper, frowned and wiped his hand on his wrapper. "My brother, truly, this is no longer strength you are showing. It is disgrace. A man does not trample the ground and expect the yams to grow sweet." Chidi's jaw clenched. His eyes darted from face to face, searching for support, but found only discomfort and disapproval. His fingers drummed impatiently on his thigh. "She is pretending," he snapped. "Women are good at that. They always act weak to escape their duties." But the words rang hollow. Even Mazi Ofor, the oldest among them, a man known for his sharp tongue and harder fists, shook his head slowly. His gray beard quivered as he spoke. Chidi, it is said that a man who waters a dying tree is the one remembered when the harvest comes. You are not watering your wife. You are burning her roots. The words struck heavier than any whip. For the first time in many moons, Chidi's confidence faltered. His friends no longer saw him as the strong, boastful man commanding a loyal wife. They saw something smaller, meaner, a man shrinking behind cruelty to hide his own wounded pride. Amara stood motionless, her heart thudding loudly in her chest. She did not lift her head, but she heard it. The shift, the crack in the mask her husband had worn for so long, and then it happened. Okoro rose to his feet, towering over the others. Without a word, he reached down and gently lifted the clay pot from the ground. Cradling it carefully in his powerful arms, he turned to Amara. "Go and rest, my sister," he said quietly, his voice heavy with respect. "Tonight, we will serve ourselves." A ripple passed through the circle of men. One by one, they rose, some nodding, some clapping Okoro's back in silent agreement. Emeka stepped forward and handed Amara a small calabash of cool water. His gaze was kind, apologetic. "You have done enough. You are not our servant." Even Omazi Ofor dipped his head solemnly. "May the ancestors strengthen you, daughter." As the men settled back under the tree, now serving themselves with their own hands, Chidi sat frozen, his throat dry and his pride crumbling like weak mortar. He had lost something precious that day, the respect of his peers, the admiration that had once fueled his vanity. And though Amara said nothing, though she shuffled slowly back toward the kitchen hut, a quiet strength rose within her chest. Her hands still shook, her body still ached, but her spirit, her spirit had begun to wake. For in Umudike, no humiliation lasts forever, and when the tide of public opinion turns, even the strongest man can find himself washed away. The night had wrapped its thick dark shawl over Umudike village, and the compound was lit only by the dim flickering glow of the small oil lamp set near the hearth. Chidi's friends lounged on raffia mats spread beneath the tall udala tree, their voices rumbling, cups of palm wine cradled in their palms. Laughter had come easily to them at first, fueled by the sweet burn of the drink, but as the night deepened and Amara shuffled closer, their laughter faded like the last notes of a dying flute. She approached slowly, carefully balancing the clay pot of steaming agusi soup and a wooden tray stacked with bowls of fufu. Her back was bent more from weariness than from the weight in her hands, her wrapper clinging damply to her thin frame. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her feet swollen and cracked, shuffled against the red earth. Yet her face, oh, her face, it carried a quiet dignity. Her chin remained slightly lifted, her eyes steady despite the shadows beneath them. Chidi reclined on his mat, eyes half lidded, a lazy smirk curling his lips. "Quickly, woman, my brothers are hungry." He barked, waving his hand. As though swatting away a fly. Amara knelt gingerly and began serving, her hands trembling as she scooped soup into bowls. The rich aroma wafted into the air, thick with ground melon seeds, uziza leaves, and tender goat meat. It was the kind of soup that once made men lick their fingers and ask for more. But tonight none of the men reached for their bowls. Instead, their gazes drifted, unbidden, to Amara herself. It was Chinedu, the eldest among Chidi's friends, a palm wine tapper with creased lines around his wise, tired eyes, who first set down his cup with a quiet, deliberate thud. "Chidi," he said, his voice cutting gently through the humid night. "Is this how you treat your wife?" Chidi's smirk faltered, confusion knitting his brow. "What are you saying, old friend? She is fine. You've eaten her food many times. Is it not sweet tonight again?" But Chinedu's gaze did not move from Amara. Slowly he rose to his feet. His joints cracked softly, but there was a quiet strength in the way he stood tall. "I have watched enough," he said simply. "A pregnant woman, heavy with child, should not be running like a market slave at this hour. This is not how men of Umudiki show pride." Beside him, two other friends shifted uncomfortably. Ikechukwu, always the jester, had lost his smile. He rubbed the back of his neck and cleared his throat. "Chidi, even a goat rests when its belly is full. Your wife is not a goat." A murmur rippled through the group. Faces that had once laughed and clapped at Chidi's jokes now turned solemn. Chidi pushed himself up, irritation flaring in his eyes. "Why are you men behaving like women? She is my wife. I feed her. I clothe her. She owes me service." Chinedu shook his head slowly. His voice softened, like a father scolding a wayward child. "No, Chidi, you owe her honor. You owe her protection. Did she not leave her father's house and bind her destiny to yours? Did you not vow before the elders to cherish her?" Chidi's mouth opened, then closed, his fists clenched at his sides. She is lazy, he mumbled, but even to his own ears the words sounded hollow. It was then that Amara, who had remained silent, carefully placed the last bowl on the tray and began to rise, but her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled, and with a soft gasp, she stumbled backwards. Before Chidi could react, it was Chinedu who stepped forward swiftly and caught her by the elbow, steadying her gently. Enough, Chinedu said firmly, his voice deep with quiet authority. He guided Amara to the empty stool by the fire and motioned for her to sit. Turning to the others, he nodded once. I will not eat food served with suffering, he declared. One by one, the others rose silently, setting down their bowls untouched. Ikechukwu, whose lips twitched as though battling words long held back, finally spoke. Chidi, we come here to share laughter, not to feast on the sweat of a woman breaking under your pride. We are not blind. This is shameful. Without another word, the men filed out of the compound, their footsteps soft but heavy with meaning. The air felt thick, charged with something weightier than all the nights of drinking and joking that had come before. Chidi stood frozen, his jaw tight, his chest rising and falling. His ears rang with the quiet emptiness that remained. He had always imagined his friends admired his control over Amara, that they saw his commands as signs of strength. But now the mirror had shattered. They had seen something else. They had seen cruelty, not command, cowardice, not courage. Behind him, Amara sat motionless. Her eyes, tired in dull moments before, shimmered faintly now in the lamplight. For the first time in moons, a thread of hope began to stitch itself back into her heart, not because she had been rescued, but because truth had finally spoken aloud. Chidi spun on his heels, his gaze falling on her, and for the briefest flicker of a second, uncertainty clouded his eyes, doubt, shame. Then, like a stubborn man clutching a crumbling wall, he turned away and stomped into his hut, his shadow long and thin under the moonlight. Amara sat alone, the firelight dancing on her face. The warm breeze rustled the leaves above her, and somewhere in the distance a night bird sang softly. For the first time in many moons, her chest rose with a deep, steady breath. Something had shifted, the wheel had turned, and in Umudike, when truth begins to whisper, no wall, no matter how tall, can keep it silent for long. The morning after, the silence fell heavy, thicker than Harmattan fog. Umdeki's compound, once alive with chatter and the footsteps of visiting friends, sat hollow. Chidi's stool beneath the Udala tree remained empty. Even the chickens seemed to peck more cautiously, as though wary of the weight in the air. Chidi sulked within his hut, pacing like a caged animal. His friend's departure the night before had struck deeper than any insult. In Umdeki, a man's honor was measured not only by his wealth, but by the respect of his peers. And respect had slipped from Chidi's grasp like dry sand through cupped palms. Imara, however, rose slowly with the dawn. Her body ached, but her heart no longer sagged under invisible chains. As the first golden light kissed the compound, her mind moved with a clarity she had not known in months. The memory of Chinedu's voice, calm, firm, truthful, echoed gently in her chest. You owe her honor. You owe her protection. That morning, she did not sweep the compound as she normally would. She did not fetch water from the stream, nor did she pound yam in the mortar. Instead, she wrapped her faded blue wrapper firmly around her waist and tied her scarf neatly over her head. Without a word to Chidi, she stepped outside the compound gates and walked the red earth path that led to the village square. By midday, word had spread like dry bushfire. Imara had gone to the Umuna Council, the gathering of elders. The square buzzed with murmurs as villagers paused their market errands to follow. It was rare, almost unheard of, for a woman to call for a council meeting, and even rarer for a wife to speak publicly against her husband. Yet here stood Amara, her back straight, her voice clear and steady, as she stood before the 5 gray-bearded elders, seated on carved wooden stools beneath the Iroko tree. Chinedu sat among them, his eyes calm but encouraging. Amara spoke without tears, without raising her voice. She told her story simply. The tireless labor despite her heavy pregnancy, the insults flung like stones, the bruises hidden beneath her wrapper, and finally, the shame Chidi had brought upon himself when he paraded her suffering before his friends. The elders listened in silence. Heads nodded slowly. Hands stroked beards thoughtfully. When she finished, Amara stepped back and bowed slightly, the thin beads around her neck clinking gently. Minutes later, the town crier's gong rang across Umdiki. Jibo, gibo, gibo. Jibo, gibo, gibo. All men and women, gather at the village square at sunset. The council speaks. Justice will be weighed. That evening the whole village gathered. Chidi was summoned by name. and though his steps were stiff with pride, his forehead glistened with sweat. He stood alone before the council, the entire village as his witness. Elder Chinedu rose first. Chidi, son of Okoro, husband of Amara, the woman who crossed rivers to bind her life to yours, do you deny her words? Chidi opened his mouth, but the heavy gazes around him snatched the lies from his lips before they could form. His shoulders sagged ever so slightly. I do not deny, he muttered. A long hum rippled through the crowd, part sorrow, part disapproval. Another elder, Nadi the Wise, spoke next. His voice, though brittle with age, rang sharp and clear. In our land, a man's wife is not his servant. She is the mother of his name, the carrier of his legacy. To shame her is to crack the pot from which your lineage drinks. He turned to Amara, who stood among the women, her head high but humble. Amara, you have spoken truth to power. You have shown restraint where many would have fled. Umdeki does not reward silence in the face of injustice. We will not let your suffering be buried beneath pride. With a nod, the elders pronounced their judgment. Chidi would kneel publicly before Amara and offer her kola nut and palm wine, the ancient symbols of apology and reconciliation. Until he fulfilled this, no man in the village would trade with him, drink palm wine in his company, or greet him in public. He would become, as the elders said, like a tree standing alone in a barren field. The crowd buzzed, a punishment steep and rare for such matters, but no voice rose in objection. Chidi's face flushed dark as charcoal, his knees wobbled. Yet under the unblinking eyes of the village, he slowly lowered himself, kneeling before Amara. His hands shook as he presented the kola nut and wine. I have wronged you, he whispered, his voice cracked and dry. Amara did not gloat. She did not smirk. She accepted the offerings with gracious calm, her gaze soft but steady. The women surrounding her, young and old alike, let out quiet murmurs of respect. Even in victory, Amara carried herself with the dignity of a river that flows strong but silent. That night, as she returned to her compound, lanterns flickering warmly along the paths, a quiet procession of women followed her. They brought gifts, yams, palm oil, woven cloth, not just out of sympathy but as tokens of honor. Chinedu's wife, Mama Ezine, grasped Amara's hand firmly. You have reminded us all, daughter, she said softly. Suffering is not a woman's destiny. Speaking truth is not a woman's crime. For Amara, it was not just revenge, it was restoration. Her voice had risen above the hush of custom. Her dignity had returned to her hands, and as the moon climbed high, it was revenge, it was restoration. Her voice had risen above the hush of custom. Her dignity had returned to her hands, and as the moon climbed high above Umdeki, casting silver light across the village roofs, a quiet smile played on her lips. Justice had awakened, and her unborn child would be born into a house no longer ruled by fear, but by respect. Weeks passed. The rains arrived gently, softening the red earth and washing the dust from the mango leaves. In Umdeki village, life flowed on. Markets opened, drums echoed in distant compounds, and palm wine trickled freshly from tapped trees. Yet, within Amara's small homestead, a quieter, deeper transformation had taken root. After the council's judgment, Chidi became a shadow of the man he once was. His voice, once sharp and commanding, dulled into silence. No longer did his friends crowd his courtyard with laughter and stories. When he passed through the market square, greetings fell away from lips like leaves in dry season. Even young boys who once dashed to him for coins turned their heads. At first, bitterness wrapped around him like a thorn bush, but slowly, painfully, reflection crept into the hollow spaces. Each quiet evening, as he sat alone beneath the Udala tree where no friends gathered, he heard only the echoes of Amara's steady voice before the council and the silent judgment of his own conscience. Amara, meanwhile, blossomed like a well-watered cassava field after drought. Women from across Umdeki began visiting her compound regularly, not out of pity, but to sit at her feet, to share stories, and to seek advice. They brought baskets of okra, wraps of smoked fish, and kegs of fresh palm oil. They listened as Amara, in her calm and thoughtful way, spoke about endurance, dignity, and truth. Before long, even the young maidens came. They gathered beneath her mango tree to learn weaving, cooking, and herbal healing from her, but more importantly, to learn courage. Amara's compound, once quiet and filled with silent labor, became alive with the hum of voices, the rustle of wrappers, and the laughter of women who knew their worth. One cool evening, as orange twilight spilled across the village sky, Chidi approached Amara as she sat weaving raffia mats on the veranda. His figure was thinner now, his steps slower but humble. He knelt quietly beside her, not under the weight of forced apology this time, but under the soft pull of realization. I have been blind, Amara, he murmured, voice low and hoarse. I mistook your gentleness for weakness, your silence for duty, yet you were stronger than me all along. Amara did not rush to answer. She laid her raffia strands aside and studied him for a long moment. His shoulders sagged, not in arrogance, but in repentance. His eyes, once sharp with control, now softened like clay, ready to be shaped anew. I never sought to rule you, Chidi, she said softly, her voice warm like evening embers. I only wanted respect, as a woman, as your wife, as the mother of your child. His gaze dropped to her rounded belly, now fuller and heavy with life. Guilt flickered through his eyes. I see now, he whispered. In the weeks that followed, the quiet rhythm between them shifted. Chidi no longer barked commands, nor did he toss insults carelessly. He rose at dawn to fetch water. He mended broken fences. He shared in cooking and joined in tending their small yam field. Not with bitterness, but as one learning the rhythm of partnership. The village took notice. By the time Amara gave birth, a smooth, safe delivery under the skilled hands of Mama Izina, news had already spread that Chidi, once the boastful man who shamed his wife, had become gentle like the morning rain. When the baby was born, a strong, healthy boy with cheeks round as udala fruit, they named him Ikenna, meaning the father's strength. But all in the village knew it was a different kind of strength that now resided in Chidi's house, one rooted in respect, patience, and humility. During the naming ceremony, Elder Chinedu rose and spoke before the gathered crowd. Let this child grow knowing that strength does not lie in the fist nor in harsh words. It lies in standing beside those you love, not above them. The crowd hummed their agreement. Amara smiled as she cradled Ikenna, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of oil lamps. Her shoulders, once stooped from years of silent suffering, sat square and proud. Her laughter rose easily. Her steps were steady and sure. She was no longer merely Chidi's wife. She had become Amara the Wise, a voice among the women of Umdiki. Her story traveled beyond their village, sung in moonlit gatherings, and whispered among mothers and daughters in distant compounds. She had transformed not just her own life, but the understanding of many others. As the seasons turned and Ikenna grew strong, Amara's compound remained a gathering place, not for gossip or idle chatter, but for unity, teaching, and shared strength. Even Chidi, when he walked beside her through the village paths now, did so with quiet humility, not as a man who owned his wife, but as a man honored to walk beside a woman of power. On one such evening, as they strolled beneath the thick-leaved trees, Chidi glanced at Amara and whispered gently, "Thank you for not leaving me in my blindness." Amara smiled, her fingers brushing lightly against his. "Even the fiercest Harmattan wind cannot dry the river that flows with truth," she replied softly. "It only takes time for the dust to clear." And as the cicadas sang into the dusk and the stars blinked awake above Umdeki, Amara knew in her heart that her journey, though scarred with pain, had ripened into something deeper than revenge. It had ripened into empowerment, respect, and legacy. Her voice had changed her home. Her courage had reshaped her marriage. Her story would guide generations after her. And so, my child, let your ears hold tightly to the story as your heart soaks in its wisdom. In the land of Umdeki, Amara's name lived longer than the echo of drums. Her story whispered through the ears of daughters yet unborn and danced on the tongues of old women who sat beneath baobab trees. And why? Because her path taught something deeper than mere revenge or punishment. It taught dignity. You see, in the ways of our people, they say, a river that flows with patience will cut through the hardest rock. Amara did not scream nor curse. She did not rise with fists or scatter her home in rage. Instead, she held her ground like the iroko tree, deep-rooted, unshaken by storms. Her quiet strength, though unseen at first, outlived all the loudness around her. Chidi learned too. Ah, yes, for even the proud lion, when humbled, learns to drink gently from the stream. His fall from pride was painful, but it birthed in him a man who understood that true manhood is not in lording over a woman, but in standing beside her, in lifting her voice, not silencing it. And those friends, their laughter, once like fireflies flickering falsely around him, vanished. It was their eyes, sharp with truth, that cracked open the gourd of Chidi's arrogance. It reminds us, my child, that no matter how long injustice hides under fine wrappers, it will always be unwrapped under the gaze of truth. So when your day comes, when you stand as wife, husband, friend, or leader, Remember Amara's tale. Respect is not a gift given to the loudest. It is earned in how gently we hold the hearts of others. It is seen in how kindly we treat those who stand beside us, especially when their voices are soft and their backs are bent with burdens. Do not wait like Chidi for the shame of others to open your eyes. Do not let pride build a compound around your heart. Instead, let understanding be the yam you plant and compassion the water you pour. For in the end, even after drums fall silent and footpaths fade, it is kindness, respect, and truth that live longer than any man's shadow. That is the story of Amara, the woman whose quiet strength changed everything. Listen well and carry it with you.